Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I like to discuss a Brexit policy put forward by a Conservative MP that is completely off the wall, even by the standard of hardened Brexiteers. Fortunately, this MP does not decide policy because he stated quite openly at the party's conference that it was always his plan with Brexit to destroy our supply chains and cause the collapse of every supermarket in the country. You think I'm exaggerating, don't you? I'm not. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So before I get onto this latest piece of craziness, and as we're mentioning the Tory party conference, it's worth another bit of Brexit amusement. So the conference has been held in Manchester again. Obviously, something like this is often very good for the local economy. Lots of businesses in the hospitality sector do very well out of it. Unfortunately, there's this thing called Brexit, and it's created some shortages, you see. Hospitality has been quite badly hit because of a lack of both workers and supplies, and that means that these businesses can't actually meet the same demands that they used to. And that's exactly what's been reported in Manchester. Not actually enough hospitality to serve the descending flocks of Tories upon the city. So while they're talking about how great Brexit is, they're also wondering why nobody has topped up their champagne yet. But anyway, little aside, on to the main event. So a Conservative MP by the name of Chris Loader was reported on The Guardian's live feed of the conference to have told a fringe meeting that it would be a good thing for supermarket supply chains to collapse. The word he reportedly used was crumble. He said it would be worth the short-term problems. That's a bit of an understatement of the use of the word problem there. But how will this help us, I hear you sceptically ask? Well, I shall quote it as it was reported. It is in our mid and long-term interest that these logistics chains do break. It will mean that the farmer down the street will be able to sell their milk in the village shop like they did decades ago. It is because these commercial predators, that is the supermarkets, have wiped that out, and I'd like to see that come back. Now, quite a bit to unpack here. The first thing is to just be clear about what they're calling for. The end of supermarkets and a world where the farmer has to sell their products at the local shop, down the street, he said. Now, I'm sure the Prime Minister would call me a naysayer at this, maybe even a doommonger, but I can spot one or two small flaws in the plan here. The first is in asking how many people actually have a farm down the street. See, when it's come to the shortage of seasonal farm workers, for example, I've tried to explain that it is realistically impossible to replace the migrant workforce we've depended on with a domestic one. Because even if it were possible to have a domestic workforce, that is a British workforce, do all this picking of crops, they still have to be migratory. The thing about farms is that they exist out in what we call the country. And the thing about people is that the vast majority exist in the towns and cities. So you have large groups of people, living in built-up areas where there are no farms, and then you don't have large groups of people living near the farms themselves. They're not going to sit there unemployed for most of the year just to be able to take advantage of a few months' work picking crops and then go back to being unemployed for the rest of the time. But this also means that the vast majority of people in the country do not have a farm just down the street. So where are they going to get their food from in this world of no supply chains, eh? Needless to say, I looked up this bubblehead of an MP and was not at all shocked to learn that he is the MP of an area where the economy is dominated by agriculture. West Dorset in this case. So what he's really doing is to try and claim he's on the side of farmers when he has voted to crush their business with both Brexit and the Brexit trade deals that mean Australian and US farmers will be able to undercut them in their own market in the future. He's thinking ahead, I suspect, and trying to blame their demise on supermarkets. Now, of course, it is true to say that farmers aren't all that chuffed with supermarkets much of the time. Supermarkets do have the power to keep the prices they pay to farms down, which has absolutely upset farmers over the years. But simply destroying supermarkets will not rectify the problem for them. As at this point, you may be thinking, well, supermarkets haven't always existed. We had cities before they popped up. So couldn't we just go back to that system? And this is the sort of blinkered thinking, unfortunately, because it does make sense on first inspection, that created Brexit in the first place. But it unfortunately also causes Brexit to fall flat on its arse every single time. Because the problem is the world has moved on. We can't go back to how it was, even if you thought that was better, because the world has moved on. It doesn't matter how much we try and regress back to the past, to be closer to the days of empire, because that's what it's all about. The world isn't going to go backwards. It's going to keep moving on. Let's do a little thought experiment. So you collapse the supply chain. Supermarkets don't exist anymore. They can't. There's nothing bringing them food. That farmer sells their produce to the village shop. I'll come back later to how that's a load of tosh, but for now, let's just say. So what about food for people without a farm down the street? Well, the farm just sends their produce to be sold by small market stall holders like they used to. Won't be as fresh, of course, because there's no processing to keep it fresh. Or, and this is just me throwing something out there, maybe what those people do is to get their food, the people in the towns and cities, they purchase the fresher, cheaper produce that is being imported from people who have a supply chain. Do we think that might actually happen? From the countries that have a food processing sector and the supply chains to manage it. And then we come to that quaint little West Dorset village where they get their milk from the local shop for local people. Well, they're paying more for it. I mean, that's clear. There's nothing to stop a farmer selling their milk locally right now. Some actually do. Some have dairy shops, some make their own dairy products there and sell them locally. The reason they don't do it more is because there isn't enough demand. So they'll have to produce way less, but they'll have to charge more because they've still got to stay in business. So what you're actually asking for these local villagers is, like decades ago, to spend way more money and spend a load of their time, half their day, just getting groceries. Going to the butchers for the meat, to the grocers for the veg, to the bakers for the bread and so on. And what about the produce not produced locally? I mean, let's say this is how they get their milk. I don't think they fancy just living on milk. So not all the produce can be local. Nowhere has farms producing everything that someone might want. So it can't all be local anyway. So do you just do without and live on whatever is local? No. You'd expect the butcher or the grocer to get it brought in from where it's produced. Well, guess what that means? A supply chain. And if a supply chain can bring you in carrots from Kent, it can bring them in from the Netherlands. If that supply chain can bring you in lamb from Wales, it can bring it from New Zealand. And do you know what else as well? If that supply chain can bring stuff to your local village, it can take it to a supermarket. So the rest of the world isn't going to allow their supply chain to crumble. The supermarkets are not going to allow their supply chains to crumble. It will work as it always has. If we force, because that's what would have to happen, if we force ours to go back to the 1950s, all we'll be doing is making foreign imports even cheaper and better quality by comparison. So if this Conservative MP is concerned about the behaviour of supermarkets and their contracts with farmers, the government could intervene in something like that if they were minded to. Of course they are not minded to, because that means the cost of food would go up, and there are more votes to be lost amongst the people who eat food than those who produce it. But collapsing the supply chain would actually only starve the population and see the MPs who caused it finding out what it's like to be on the wrong end of a revolution. But of course, as crazy as the current government are, they're not actually this batshit crazy, are they? Let's be honest. It is possible that neither is Chris Loder MP. He's basically like Nigel Farage, perhaps, shooting his mouth off about what should happen and claiming all sorts of beneficial consequences without having to face up to tough questioning, secure in the knowledge that nobody is actually mad enough to try it. And if they were, they are not actually in the position to implement it personally. So if it all does go wrong, they'll just blame the actual consequences on a botched job from the government. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.